USA Today.
I'm Walt Thiessen.
With me today is longtime listener, poet laureate, and Taya master Anne-Marie Young.
This is your Daily Dose of Happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. It's summertime, and one of the things that I think most people associate with summertime is going out, going to maybe the beach or to the mountains or something, bringing along a picnic lunch, and then going to get some snacks and maybe getting some more afterward. And after a while, it's like you've had quite a bit to eat, and then you do it all again the next day. I mean, that's the way summer works, right? That's the rule. It does have a kind of a side effect that comes along with it sometimes, though, which is what happens when the eating gets a little out of control. Something you know a little bit about, right, Anne-Marie? I mean, just occasionally.
Yeah. Sugar addiction. Big tick.
Well, we're going to see if we can do something about that today by inviting our guest, Abila, in today. She's a binge eating expert, and she's going to share some ideas about how do you deal with that kind of situation. So, Amber, welcome to the show. And how are you doing today?
Thanks for having me today, Walt and Anne-Marie. I'm so excited to be here.
Glad to have you. And how did you end up being a binge eating expert? I mean, that's not the first thing that your usual teenager coming out of high school is saying, I'm going to be a binge eating expert.
Yeah, I never thought I would be in this position, but I am so grateful that I am, because I'm here today after struggling with binge eating and food myself for many, many years, and really finding a solution that I didn't see anyone else talking about before. And so I knew that it was my mission. I had kind of one of those movie moment days in February a couple of years ago where I was like, I know it's my passion and mission in life to help other people overcome their struggles with food, thinking about food all day, overeating, binge eating, restricting, all of the things in the same way that I did over the years.
And usually when somebody embarks on an unusual path like this one, they went through it themselves, and you just indicated you did. Tell us that story. What was that about?
Yeah, so it started in around 2015, and I started with calorie counting. And most people, when they want to lose weight, they Google, how do you lose weight? Oh, calories in, calories out. So let's just eat less calories and move more. It seems very simple on the surface. So I downloaded MyFitnessPal. I started putting everything in. I was tracking it, and I was starting to lose weight. And I thought, great, like this is the end. I'll reach my goal weight, and then we'll just be on my merry way. But that is not what happened. The longer I was calorie counting, the more obsessive I became about it, where I couldn't go out to restaurants anymore because I didn't know what the calories were on the menu. And it gave me so much anxiety. I was so scared to gain weight at that point then, because I thought, oh my gosh, I'd worked so hard to lose all this weight. But what started happening was one day, a few months later, after I was calorie counting, it was around Christmas time. I went downstairs and I thought, okay, I'm just going to have one cookie. I've been so good. Let me have a cookie. And then I ate that cookie, and I was filled with this overwhelming desire for more. I described it as like I became a ghost out of my body, and I just like rapidly started eating more cookies. And I had another and another until I had 7 cookies. And that was also the very first time that I ever purged. So I did struggle with bulimia for a time period as well, because I was absolutely so terrified of gaining weight. I just wanted nothing to do with it. And I wanted to do everything in my power to make sure I didn't lose weight. Gain weight and kept the weight loss off. And so what happened was then I started getting into the cycle where I would have these big binges that then started happening weekly and then daily. And then I thought, oh no, now the next day I have to be good and I have to restrict and I have to eat less. And it just became this overwhelming cycle. So the first place I went to was therapy, which is usually where people go when they're struggling with food and eating disorders or just disordered eating in general. And therapy, it helped me with the bulimia aspect, but it still didn't help me with binge eating. And I later learned down the line that binge eating was not actually recognized as an eating disorder until 2013, which is only a little over 10 years ago. So because of that, a lot of the research and the methods is very new or outdated based off of old philosophies and beliefs about where it came from and how it started. And I found that we kept going to my past and trying to figure out like this big trauma when I didn't really find one. And so I just really felt like I was broken because, something that should have helped me, therapy, just wasn't. So I took it upon myself to go out and find other solutions. And I got to page 50 of Google one day of how to stop binge eating. And then I came across this blog post that talked about how binge eating could just be viewed as a habit, and how this woman had viewed it as a habit and had really helped her overcome it. And that was really a key moment in my journey, not the only moment, but really the biggest one that helped me start to simplify recovering from these eating habits and truly becoming this normal, natural eater again. Because it wasn't that something was wrong with me or I was broken. It was simply that my brain had gotten in the habit of, every single day for the past couple of years, I had binged. And so my brain now thought this is something that was necessary for me to do in order to survive. And everyone outside of me told me, well, you just need to stop restricting. You just need to eat more food and then you'll stop binge eating. But the truth was I was eating more food. I was eating plenty of food every single day. I was no longer restricting. I was eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks. But it was really when I said, oh, it was because I started from this dieting background that my brain now thinks, even though I'm not dieting anymore, it's gotten in this habit of believing that binge eating is actually necessary for my survival when it's truly not.
Interesting. Actually, one of the most interesting things that jumped out at me was you actually took the time to get to page 50 on the Google results.
Oh yeah, I've really researched it all because everything Google tells you is like all of the same recycled BS of drink more water, take a bubble bath, call a friend. And, not that those are bad things to do. Those are great self-care activities, but they're not really addressing why you're binge eating in the first place. They're just kind of a Band-Aid cover-up solution that can help temporarily. But what would happen to me is I'd go for a walk and I'd come back and I'd still binge. So it was like, yeah, it was great. It delayed it for a little bit, but it didn't really get to the root cause of what was going on.
Yeah, that's true. And that's often the way things work out. Fascinating, though, that you were that deeply committed to finding the answer. I mean, the first 49 pages of Google that didn't have the answer weren't enough to stop you. You had to keep going. So you were driven. You were motivated. It just took a while to find answers that worked for you. And as you alluded to before we got started doing the program today, a lot of what we talk about around here is mindset. Clearly, your mindset was, I'm going to find this. Come hell or high water, I'm going to find this.
Yeah. I had this deep belief that there had to be a solution, that there had to be someone who would come out of this. And I think that's what led me to trying so hard to figuring out how can I really solve this forever and not just like recover and like hopefully maintain some of my progress, but truly solve these eating issues for good and become someone who can just eat intuitively, can just eat in moderation. And that's really what I've achieved today. But it was from this dedication and this willingness to not give up and this willingness to believe that something wasn't wrong with me and that there had to be a way out of this that really drove me to making sure I found a way out.
Which is a good thing. Actually, as you were talking, you were reminding me of when I was quite a bit younger. I was in my 20s and I was living alone for the first time. And I was not feeling good about myself. I was not feeling good about my life or my prospects or anything. Nothing really terrible had happened, but I just felt like I was like stuck in a corner, like nothing was going to happen with my life. And so one of the ways I decided to try to deal with it was to go out and get a box of chocolate chip cookies. And that box of chocolate chip cookies, that would get me through the week, right? And it got me through 2 hours. And then it was gone. And I actually went through that a few times. That did a couple things, actually. I didn't really expect the outcome. But one thing that it did is it sugared me up so much that I lost all interest in having sugar anymore. But the second thing it did is it pointed out something I already knew, which was there's stuff going on here that the eating isn't going to solve, but that's what I keep reaching for.
Yeah. Well, you pointed out something really interesting there that is actually something I incorporate in my coaching, was that at a point your body gets tired of it.
Oh yeah.
It realizes that I don't want sugar anymore. Like this just really isn't good. It doesn't even taste good anymore. And certainly it doesn't feel good. And that's actually something that when we're binge eating, we don't really notice. We just kind of sweep over. Like we might notice it a little bit after, oh, that didn't feel good. But we don't start to realize that we actually don't have desire for that food anymore once we pay attention to the pain of it. And that was another big part in my journey was there is this common idea in the binge eating world that binge eating is helping you cope. Now, yes, as you mentioned, sometimes it can temporarily like give us this little distraction for something in our life. And we can use it as a form of procrastination, as a way to just like not really think about things. But what I found is that when we are telling ourselves that this is helping me cope, it makes it that much harder to get rid of, because then our brain is perceiving it as something that we need to help us feel better, when in reality, every single time after I binged, I never felt better. There was not really one part of me that felt like, you know what, that was a good idea. I should have done that for sure. And so it's become really big for me and my clients to point out that binge eating only and always makes everything in our life worse. And when we can start showing our brain the truth of it, then we start telling ourselves what is the reality of it. And then it becomes less desirable of an activity. It doesn't sound as fun. If we go around telling ourselves with alcohol, this is a good example. Oh my gosh, it's so fun to go out and have a glass of wine. And I just love like relaxing with my friends. Like that makes you want to go have a glass of wine with your friends because you're creating desire with your thoughts. On the flip side, if you're like, oh, I don't really like drinking wine because I always feel so tired after, and I leave the evening not really remembering my conversations with the friends, and it's so expensive, and then the bill is like twice as much, you have now decreased your desire for wanting to have that glass of wine. And food can be the same way with the story we start to tell ourselves about the experience of eating it.
So Anne-Marie, which kind of story do you tell? Let's get down to the brass tacks of it, right?
Yeah. So now I try to tell myself the truth of it. So you have to look at, what actually happens in reality, and not just the truth of it, but also like, what do you want to believe around food? So what that looks like for me practically on the day-to-day basis is, when I'm making a food decision, I always ask myself, how do I want to feel first? Because I might look at, I have like this yummy cookie dough in my fridge right now and say, ooh, that sounds good. But then I check in with my body and I am telling myself how it's going to feel. And most people be like, well, that's going to feel bad. When you tell your brain that's going to feel bad, that goes right over your head. It is not specific enough for your brain to conceptualize what bad means. So I tell myself, okay, if I were to eat that cookie dough right now, I mean, this like weird sugary film taste on my teeth that I don't really like. And I don't want that right now. I'm also going to feel like this blood sugar rush where I get this high and then my brain feels kind of foggy throughout the day. I feel fuzzy. I can't concentrate as much. I have a podcast interview after this. I want to feel clear-headed and energized and light like I do when I have something else. And so all of those little very specific feelings and sensations in my body help show my brain what the truth of eating that food is. I'm not telling myself, oh, but that would be so yummy. I love the chocolate chips in it and it's so tasty, because that would make a very different experience of how I'm going to feel around that food.
That's true. But I want to get back to my question for Anne-Marie, though. Is this something, like when you have these conversations with yourself, Anne-Marie, what are your conversations like?
I think for me, if it's not really a conversation that I have with myself, it's more that I tend to make the wrong choices when I'm, one, not prepared, or two, just very tired and just want to grab something rather than cook something. I eat differently to my family because they eat meat and I'm vegetarian. So sometimes if I haven't literally got the energy to do 2 meals, I'll just do one for them and then probably not make the best choice for myself. So I always tend to have like all my salad stuff washed, or on a Sunday I'll do a few days worth of proteins. So I find preparation for me is the key for me being consistent. But if I'm tired or a bit emotional, it just goes out the window. I need to probably have those conversations with myself on how I'm actually going to feel.
That makes sense. I'm curious also to know, when you encounter that, how do you decide to handle it?
I'm a lot kinder to myself than I used to be. I used to really beat myself up, and then you just go around on a really dangerous circle of like, well, I've done it now, so I'm just going to keep going, and you just, I'll start again tomorrow, that kind of thing. So if I do like have a really bad lunch, then I'll make sure that my dinner's okay, or I'll go for a walk, or just do some act.
I like that, because one of the things that I think people will tend to do more than anything else is not only will they binge eat, but then they'll criticize themselves for it and beat themselves up. And I mean, Amber, you're more the expert on this, but I'm going to think that's probably going to reinforce the cycle rather than break it.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, I didn't catch. Oh, go ahead. I didn't catch Anne-Marie and Amber. They sound so similar.
I thought about that. Yeah, similar names. Yeah.
But yeah, something that I've noticed too, that was huge in my journey, where it was this all or nothing thinking. It's like, we're either being good today and we're having the meal prep and we're choosing exactly the healthiest options, or we're going crazy, we're ordering the pizza, and it's this all or nothing mentality that really messes us up. I say it's really the first cookie that's the problem. It's when we have that first cookie and then we tell ourselves, oh no, I've ruined today. And then we go have the next 3. Like those next 3 are really the problem. It wasn't the first one. And I love this analogy of, imagine if your car tire popped, you wouldn't say, that's a shame. Let me go pop the other 3 to ruin the rest. You would just be like, oh, oops, let me go fix that. Let me go see what went wrong there and go analyze it and just get curious about what happened. And that's what we want to do with our eating habits too, is not beat ourselves up or say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're such a bad driver. You don't deserve to drive at all. Let's just pop all of our tires. It's, oh, well, okay, how interesting. I ran over a nail. Let's be careful of the nails next time and let's see what happened. And really just getting into this curious mindset around our eating habits can make a huge difference.
Even the nail part is a little bit tough because, how often have you had a flat tire where you actually knew there was a nail there? Quite honestly, it's not the first thing that happens. Like, oh yeah, there's that nail. I'm going to make sure that I not drive over. Oh, too late. It doesn't go that way. So we deal with it after the fact. And then when we're dealing with it after the fact, that's when we can still find ways to beat ourselves up. And that's all we're really doing is saying, my response is going to be not healthy. That's really all we're doing.
Yeah. And I like to think about it as also you're doing B- work versus A+, right? Not aiming to be every single thing perfect all the time, but like what would be good enough for me today? Because that can kind of take the pressure off of ourselves of, I have to be perfect, otherwise it's not going to work. When really, I like to say I failed my way all the way to success. I did lose about 30 pounds in my journey. And during that journey, I definitely was not perfect. I was not someone who, meal prepped every single meal and ate perfectly. Like I ate dessert every day during that process. And I had times where I accidentally had a little bit too much. But because I stopped doing the all or nothing thinking, I was able to just get right back to it. And then that's what actually led to my success.
Yeah, I went through a similar thing about 2.5, almost 3 years ago. I was my ex left me, and I was divorced. And anyone who's been through that knows, or anybody who's been through any kind of a breakup knows, that, it's a very emotional time, very difficult time to go through. And there are a lot of different changes that go on in your life during that time. So there's a lot to handle. But there can be plus sides. And there was a plus side for me in that over the course of roughly 12 to 18 months from that point onward, I lost 30 pounds. And kind of similar to what you're describing, the first 20, I wasn't even trying to do. It wasn't even on my monitor. I looked at the scale one day like, whoa, I lost 20 pounds. I wonder if I can lose the next 10. It was just, there was no planning. There was no special dieting or anything like that. Literally being kicked out of my normal routine, kicked me out of my normal routine. And so my eating behavior changed as well. And I didn't even realize it, which just goes to prove it's not about dieting.
I think, and what I'm learning sort of, because I'm training with a coach in the mornings, as I've mentioned before, but I'm learning sort of like the importance of your overall health, like having good sleep, having good rest, having good exercise, and just how it all impacts each other. If I don't have a good night's sleep, then the next day that cycle starts again. I'm too tired. I don't want to prep. I don't want to eat properly. I just want to grab and go. So there's so many compartments to your health and your eating habits that you just don't realize.
And we're so used to thinking about things in terms of diet, mainly because that's what's thrown at us through the marketing all the time, that it's understandable. We would, kind of hook onto that. But Amber, isn't it kind of nice to know that's not the only way?
Right. Absolutely. And it is really helpful. This is often what I'll remind my clients of too, that health is so much more than just what you eat. It is how you sleep. It's also your friendships. This is when people leave out all the time. Like how socially connected we are is a huge determinant of our health and longevity and well-being. And so there's so many other factors, which is actually really good news, because that means one day maybe you had a little bit too much dessert, but you slept really well, or you got outside in sunshine, or you hung out with your best friend and you had a nice laugh with them. That is just as much a beneficial thing for your health as maybe having a salad was that night. So, it's reminding ourselves too that we can't be perfect and good in one area and be healthy if we're ignoring all these other areas too. And that doesn't mean we have to be good in every other area, but it's a balance, right? That's how it is with our health. Is some days are better than others with other categories, but it's making sure that throughout the weeks, throughout the months, throughout the years, that we're properly attending to all these different areas.
Yeah. And I think you're touching on something that definitely would get overlooked, although it's very helpful in all areas of our lives. And that's deciding who you're going to hang out with, deciding who your tribe is, to use the modern terminology, because you get that decision. It's up to you, especially these days where everybody's so mobile and interconnected on the net and so forth. So you can choose who you're going to connect to. The thing that always intrigues me is, and we've all seen this, the people who hang out with each other and they're all complaining and moaning about the same thing that they're all going through, and none of them gets anywhere with it, whether with weight loss or relationships or jobs or anything else, money, it doesn't matter what it is. You hang out with people who have that same mindset and you persist with that mindset, and then you wonder why nothing changes. Like, well,
a lot of it has to do with our identity piece too, that when we hang out with people who are in a similar struggle, it can feel good because it can feel like we're not alone. So there is a part that can be very healing about that, to know like, hey, I'm struggling with this and they're struggling with it too. But when you start to feed off of each other's struggles, then there starts to be this component of, this is just who I am. Like me and my friend group, we're just dieters. We're just always trying to lose weight. We're always trying to look for the latest and greatest new thing, the new hack to make us healthier and help us lose weight. And then when someone can start to change their eating habits, what's really interesting is they'll start to self-sabotage because it feels safer to be where they are right now, because this is where all their social connections are. This is what they bond over. And so they feel safer here than they do with where they want to go. So a big part that I focus on in my coaching too is really shifting this identity and letting go of this identity that I'm just someone who struggles with food, that I'm just someone who has a hard time losing weight, that I'm just someone who overeats or just can't really eat normally. I'm someone who's addicted to sugar. That can be a belief too, because it's something that we have done versus who we are. So I like to use the distinction of sometimes in the past, I've overeaten sugar. Sometimes in the past, I have felt out of control around sugar, but that doesn't necessarily mean today or in the future that I have to be someone who is addicted to sugar. And that helps release it from our core identity of who we are and make it just something that we've done, which makes it so much easier to change. And then it makes it so we can become this person with this new identity of someone who is this normal, confident eater who doesn't struggle with food. And it makes all of our actions that are in line with that so much easier.
Now, one thing that does occur whenever someone is trying to make any kind of major change in their life, and certainly this qualifies as a major change, they encounter what I technically like to call stuck points. I'm just stuck on this. For whatever reason, I just can't seem to get past it no matter what. And I'm curious to know when you encounter a client, because you're coaching, you're working with clients, when you're encountering a client who has a stuck point, how do you help them get past their stuck point?
Great question, Walt. And a lot of it has to do with first asking ourselves why. Why do we feel stuck right now? What's going on beneath the surface? So for a few examples, someone might say, I feel stuck because I've continued to binge the past couple days or weeks. It's like, okay, well, why has that been happening? And that will uncover some of what's going on. Or I'm feeling really stuck because every time I go into the office, there's donuts and I always go and I eat lots of them. It's like, okay, well, why does that feel challenging to you? What does it feel like when you try to tell yourself, today we're not going to have one? What comes up for you? So always asking yourself why, the more we can ask that question to ourselves, the deeper of the layers we're going to uncover and the more transformative of a change we can have.
Do you find, Anne-Marie, that asking that question about why you're stuck helps?
Yeah, I think anytime you ask yourself a question or you listen to your body, that's enormously beneficial, because you're getting to know yourself, and I think that builds your confidence and your self-assurance, self-awareness, in the fact that then you can start turning these habits around.
Yeah, and you need a starting point for that turnaround to happen too.
Absolutely. Usually it's like most of the guests that we see, you kind of hit a rock bottom, don't you? And then think, right, I can't keep doing this. And then you find your way back up.
Do you remember when you hit rock bottom, Amber?
I think there was quite a few moments of rock bottom.
Not just one. Oh, okay.
Yeah, because, I definitely had some rock bottom moments with bulimia just because of the purging involved is just such a physical experience that is honestly very miserable. So I had a lot of moments just over the toilet being like, I remember thinking at one point too, I had binged so much one day, like thinking like, am I going to die from this? Like literally I Googled, has anyone died from binge eating? And I found out someone has. And I was even more terrified where someone had to get their stomach pumped, but they didn't do it fast enough. And they literally ate so much food that they died because their stomach couldn't hold the capacity for it. So, that was definitely more in the beginning of my journey because I was restricting so heavily that the binges were a lot bigger. Like my binges were 3,000, 4,000 calories all at once in my body. So it was really miserable. A lot of laying on the floor, a lot of crying, a lot of rough moments with that. But then, as I started to move through my journey, the binges started to get smaller, but I still really struggled with food and my relationship with food. I was continuing to gain weight. And I just, again, my biggest fear was gaining weight. And I remember writing in my journal one day, like, I will just do anything to lose weight. Like, I just do not want to gain it. But then that later evolved to, I don't care if I gain weight. I just want to feel normal around food, and I'll do anything to feel normal around food, because then I think there was also this rock bottom moment of just every second of my day was consumed with thinking about food. What did I have last night? What was I going to have next? What's going to be for lunch? Oh my gosh, was that too many calories? Was it not enough? And all of these different rules that I'd accumulated over the years just like consumed my mind. And I was like, you know what? I don't even care about my body anymore. If I could just get rid of all of this constant food noise and thinking about it, and I could just get back to living like a normal person, like I would be so internally grateful. But then the irony of that was, once I got to that point where I released this strong attachment to the weight loss goal was when I actually lost the weight, because I wasn't so in desperate need of it, of like, this needs to happen right now or else. And it just became so much more of, how can I love myself on this deeper level and treat my body with the respect that I haven't given it all these years? Yeah.
As you were describing that, I had a very weird example come to my mind. The J.R.R. Tolkien book, The Hobbit, and also The Lord of the Rings, because two of the major characters, Merry and Pippin, are very much into eating, as most hobbits are. And so they want to know what they're having for breakfast, and then for second breakfast, and 11s, and then lunch, and then after lunch and afternoon tea. And then it's like this entire day is, scoped out in terms of food. So what happens? Well, they end up going to war. Like, oh, okay, well, there's an interesting story. I mean, how much of a metaphor is that for what people end up doing, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of scary, really, when you think about it, out of what's supposedly a nice, fun novel to read.
Right. But
sorry, Amber. I was just going to ask Amber, because you said about that food noise, and I think that's something that a lot of people, and that was actually going to be my question, then you naturally brought it up, which I loved. But have you got kind of any techniques to getting rid of that kind of food noise, and to help some of our viewers maybe hear stuff in?
Absolutely. So food noise has been a term that's become popularized in like the last year or two that I think so accurately describes what this experience is, of it just like this noise around food that we can't turn off. But really, this concept has been around for a while, where we're thinking about food all the day, food obsession, food preoccupation. There's a lot of different ways that it's been described over the years. And I actually just did a podcast about this recently on my own podcast on food noise, because I know it's such a hot topic. But basically, when we think about what food noise is, all it is thoughts around food. So yes, it's more thoughts than we want to have, but it's essentially how we're thinking about food is the food noise. So it's usually tends to be pretty frequent, but the food noise, the content of it, is usually what bothers us, because there's a lot of thoughts around food that are making us feel anxious, fearful, just really overwhelmed by all of our thoughts around food. And the first place that it can come from is, one, if we are restricting. And how I define restriction is if you are not giving yourself food when you're hungry on a consistent basis. So restriction is not saying no to yourself after your fourth cookie of the day. That is called loving self-discipline. But restriction is truly when we are not feeding ourselves properly. And what happens then is we all forget that we're actually just animals at the end of the day. And so our brain is like, hello, we're going to die. We're not going to have enough food. There's probably a famine happening on the face of the earth where everything's disappearing. So we want to make sure you get enough. Think about if you went all day without water, you would probably think about water a lot because you'd be like, I'm really thirsty. That is your brain trying to help you get water. And if you told yourself, no more water, you got to be good for today, maybe tomorrow, that noise would probably go louder and you'd want water even that much more. So that's one thing that can happen with food is if we are not eating enough. Of course, there's going to be food noise around it. There's nothing wrong with you. That is a very normal, healthy biological response to restriction. But if you fall in the category, you're like, no, Amber, and a lot of people think they're eating enough. They actually might not be. But if you're like, no, I know I'm eating enough for my body right now. I'm not restricting anymore. And I'm still getting this food noise. That's where we want to look at what are your thoughts specifically around food and starting to dissect those. So I recommend keeping a notepad or just like in your notes app for the day. And when you're getting this experience of food noise, writing out, what am I thinking about food right now? Is it, like I mentioned, what am I going to have for dinner again tonight? And then answering that question for yourself. Oh, I'm going to have this. Well, what did I eat yesterday? And was that bad? Answering that question. Was I bad yesterday? Well, no, I just had some food. Maybe I overate a little bit, but there's nothing about that makes me a bad human being. Maybe let's take a second to analyze that, to look at it, to ask what went well, what didn't go well, what might I do differently today? So it's really starting to dissect those actual thoughts around food, looking at, are these thoughts true? If there are questions, answering those questions around food, because if they're just floating through our head, then that's when they're not going anywhere because they don't have answers. Our brain's wanting answers. So I find any questions that we have around food to give yourself an answer for it.
Good advice.
Does that resonate? Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, because I think my food noise started, I mean, I don't have it so much now because like I used to like not eat until lunchtime, just thinking I was saving, calories or fasting, whatever. And now I don't. I have a high protein breakfast and that keeps me going until lunchtime, sometimes further. So, I feel I'm looking after my body and I feel better for it. But when my food noise really hit in was exactly what you said, Amber, is when I was restricting myself. I did Weight Watchers and I wasn't losing the weight fast. So I halved the amount of food that I was supposed to eat. And I wasn't going out with my friends because I didn't want to drink and have empty calories and things like that. So and that just is not a healthy place to be. And then, of course, once you've restricted it, that's what your brain's just going, I need this, give me some more. And then it kind of then swirled.
Yeah. One other thing I'll mention is kind of my hot take on food noise. I think a lot of food noise is happening today too because of the use of social media and just the ease of information that we can get in our fingertips at any given moment. Because you scroll Instagram, and especially if you're someone who's in this category of you struggle with food, you're probably following all these people to give you tips around food. Your For You page and what's being shown to you on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook is all about food. So you're getting all this input of eat this way, don't eat this way, do this, don't do that. Yeah. This is bad for you. This is good for you. And that just makes it so confusing to your brain. And then you go down and look in your fridge and you're like, I don't even know what to do. And then you feel over flooded with this, just these rules around food. So I think that's something else to consider too, that if you are someone who is like on social media and you're following like 100 different people or listening to 100 different podcasts on how to stop overeating, how to lose weight, how to be healthy, I recommend narrowing that down a little bit. One, using social media less in general, which we know is good for us in a million different ways beyond just this.
Completely agree.
Right. But just thinking about, okay, who is someone I really know, like, and trust, that I value their opinion on food, that they've done what I want to do. They are where I want to be. And maybe just following a handful of those people, no more. So you can really get rid of like all the millions of different opinions of how you should and shouldn't eat, because that really crowds out your brain and makes it really hard to decide of how to show up around food during the day.
Sorry, I was just going to imagine, I'm sure it's probably, is it not like learning what works for you and what your body likes to eat? Because I know my body doesn't like to eat some foods, and my body, likes fruit and yogurt in the mornings and things like that. And that works well for me, and just finding your own mojo.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the best thing of all would be delete it all. And simple food journal to help you track how your unique body responds to things. If that's all you were to do, you could get so much more insight than you could ever imagine. And what I mean by this is not a calorie counting food journal, but literally just writing down, what did I eat today? Why did I eat it? And like, what are my thoughts about that? Because if you're eating something and you're like, oh, I noticed that after that, my stomach felt a little off, or I felt really tired in the afternoon after I had this. That's going to give you some valuable information about what you just had. And your brain will start to notice that as you're paying attention and help you make different decisions. So, there is a lot of good advice out there, but I absolutely agree that, one of the best things we can do is learn how to trust ourselves and our own body. I say that our hunger and fullness are our most accurate calorie counters that we'll ever have in our life if we can learn to use it. If we're zoned out of it, if we're not tuned in, if we are following all these other rules, it's not going to be so accurate. But if you can learn how to truly listen to your own body and trust yourself and find alignment with what you want to eat and what feels good to you, that will be a tool and a skill that will last you for life.
As you were talking and thinking back to the conversation we had a few moments ago about the food noise, it occurs to me there's actually a question in there. The question is, where do you find most of the food noise comes from? Does it come from out there or from inside?
It can be both. Again, it depends on if someone is restricting or not. If someone's restricting, then it can definitely be biologically like what's just going to come up for you. But I think it can also be from outside sources. So I think it can really be from both places. There's also all of that all or nothing thinking around food that we're taught, like there's a good way to eat and a bad way to eat. And like, I got to figure out which one it is and which category I'm going to fall into today. That also creates a lot of stress and anxiety throughout our day of like trying to be this perfect person around food when really there's no such thing as a perfect eater. It's just finding what works for you and your body.
Yeah, one of my least favorite words is the word perfect. Partly because I've never found a definition that satisfies me. Even the ones that I find in the dictionary, I look at like, well, yeah, that still doesn't explain it. To this day, I don't really know what perfect means. And I found that I'm now in later years of life. I actually understand the definition less now than I did when I was younger. Anne-Marie, you know what I mean?
There's no perfect description of perfect.
That's right. There isn't. It's crazy. You'd think we'd have it down by now, but no, turns out it's such an elusive word that there's really no way to pin it down, which is what makes it so fascinating that we end up spending so much time going after something we can't even define.
Well, I was just about to say that because perfect's unobtainable, perfect's boring, and perfect is just stressful. I remember when I was at school and I was a perfectionist with my writing and I was so stressed and now it's lovely, but it's a way more scruffier than it used to be.
Right.
So now, but do you know what I mean? That perfection of having like, just yuck.
Well, the perfection also, what goes along with it, I guess you could say, is giving the constant attention. I mean, that's what you were talking about, Amber, how you keep giving that constant attention, it just weighs on you. It just overcomes it. Your life is subsumed to, I gotta be focused on food. Food is the issue. It's the only issue, and that's not much of a life.
Absolutely.
When you go through that kind of a thought process with a customer, not with a customer, with a client, I mean that's partly, I'm sure, what the conversations are about, how they're doing that kind of thing. Give us some ideas about how you guide a customer or a client. Why do I keep saying customer? How do you guide a client who is kind of caught up in that whole motif, caught up in that whole mindset of everything is about food? How do you break that?
Yeah. So I go through 6 pillars. I have a confident eater program, I call it, that goes over 6 months. And we go over these 6 pillars. So I'll just briefly go over each of these steps. We've touched on some of them a bit. So the first one is creating a positive food mindset. This is looking at how our thoughts, feelings, and actions are all related. So earlier I was talking a lot about how our thoughts can increase or decrease our desire for our food. So if we're telling ourselves desire increasing thoughts all day long about how this food is so delicious, how I don't know when I'm going to get it again, how I'm going to be good tomorrow, so, let's be bad today, that's going to make us want to eat a lot more right now than we want to be eating, versus desire decreasing thoughts of, I can have this food again anytime. It's not going anywhere. I will feel my best choosing this right now, but I could also choose this and choose amounts that feel good for my body. I'm in charge. I'm in control. That's going to make it so we go into that situation feeling in charge and in control and not having that same strong desire. This also works a lot with emotional eating. So a big part of my work is learning how to sit with sensations of emotions. A lot of people think that we need to change our emotional state, that if we're feeling bad, the first thing to do is get out of that and feel good. But really, one of the biggest skills we could ever learn in our human experience and going through this life is not how to change our emotional state, but how to be okay sitting with it. the times that we feel overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, fearful, saying, I can sit with this sensation. I don't need to do anything about it. I don't need to go escape it with food or alcohol or porn or whatever else we go to. I can just sit with it. I can feel with it. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but I can handle discomfort. That's a core skill that you need to have in order to stop emotional eating. And then I teach people the second thing is how to eat anything in moderation. So this is where we work on my trigger food process, I call it. And this is where I incorporate a lot of aspects of mindful eating. So mindful eating is just really bringing our full mind and our attention to our food. So many of us are eating, watching our phone, TV, laptop, computer, like anything else except the food itself. And all of these screens are really hyper distractions that pull us so much away from whatever we're doing. You know, you'll be on your phone and next thing you know, your bag of chips is gone and you're like, I don't even remember eating any of that. So it's really important to become more mindful with our food choices. And that's actually, there's so much research on how it increases our satisfaction, how we eat less overall, how we become fuller quicker. We're not actually becoming fuller quicker, but we notice it better when we're not eating distracted. Then third, I talk about our urges and how to overcome our urges. Our urges are the strong feeling of desire, of cravings right before we go into that habit of overeating. So this is where I am going to give someone a lot of tools, a lot of resources and suggestions around that. One thing I have for all the listeners today is my guided audio to stop a binge. And this is where I go over some of my top tools and techniques on how to stop an urge to binge in that moment. So we'll talk about, you can get that on my website, theconfidenteater.org, and it is up there, Stop a Binge audio. Then the fourth thing is listening to your hunger and fullness. So using this built-in calorie counter that we already have, learning how to trust it, tune into it. A lot of people will tell me, well, if I listen to my body, it just wants Oreos and Ben & Jerry's all day. And I'm like, well, you're probably not listening to your body then. That's probably listening to your mind. Your mind is telling you want that. But when you tune into your body, you know that's not going to feel good. And your body will give you signals that doesn't feel good. It will give you that intuition and that knowledge. Fifth is having unshakable self-confidence in your body. So it's really important, like I mentioned, to let go of this strong attachment to the weight loss goal. It's okay to have the desire to lose weight, but when it becomes your only focus, it just makes everything so much more demotivating because weight loss is a long-term result. It is something that comes in months or even years from now. And so we have to stay focused on the habits that we're doing today and loving and respecting our body throughout that process. And then finally is maintaining your progress. And we do this by shifting your identity, as I mentioned earlier, going from someone who's thinking, I just struggle with food, I'm a sugar addict, I'll never lose this weight, to like, no, I can be this normal, natural eater, and this can be something that's easy for me to do. That's what brings it into our identity as like who we are now. And then that makes it so it lasts for life.
Yeah. That ties back to what you talked about at the very beginning of the show, the identity. In other words, who are you? Who is the real you behind this, beyond the person who is fiending after food?
Yeah.
Because until you know that, you're not going to get anywhere. That's the first primary thing, I think, is just finding some way to not only know, but also to understand and appreciate uncritically. Just appreciate who you are. So, personally, I believe that the number one reason why people struggle with lack of self-confidence, lack of self-esteem, self-love, and so forth, is because they beat the crap out of themselves every day. I mean, just routinely every single day, and usually not mindfully, to use the term you were describing. Usually just they do it without even being aware they're doing it to themselves. And then they wonder over time why they've lost their confidence. So it's a big deal to know yourself, because knowing yourself does include deciding how you're going to treat yourself. Yeah. So how do you help people to treat themselves better?
So a lot of it is that awareness of, what am I telling myself? So it's first like being aware that I am even saying these mean things to myself all day. But then it's really useful to look at, what might I be getting out of this? How might this be trying to serve me in a way? Because a lot of people think that, well, I have to beat myself up in order to get where I want to go. And they're very used to using this hustle, beat down, like cracking the whip on myself approach, because they think that's what's going to be motivating to them. Maybe it might be, but usually if that feels motivating to you, it's usually because there's this thought underneath it of like, I can do this. You've got this. Like, I'm really proud of you. It's possible for you. That's usually where the good action is coming from, not like, you're horrible, your life sucks, you got to get it together. It's like usually there's a layer underneath that is actually motivating you, not what you think it's motivating you by. But we got to look at, if you are someone who's speaking to yourself kindly and you are telling yourself how good of a job you're doing and how proud you are of yourself and how you're really doing it and how, every day you're making progress. The worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to feel really good about yourself. You're going to feel really happy in your life, and things are probably going to get much better. Even if you, let's say imaginatively, you were never to get to your goal weight or your dream eating habits, you would at least be feeling better in your day. But what really happens the majority of times with most people is they're treating themselves well. And then what happens when you have this urge or this craving to eat is you want to talk kindly to yourself through it and help yourself through it. Like imagine if a child came to you and was like, I'm really struggling with this thing right now. And you're like, get over it, like try harder. It's like, no, that's not going to work. What's going to work is like, oh, I wonder why you're struggling with that. And giving it the child kind and motivating, encouraging words. And when we do that with ourselves, that's going to lead to so much more better actions where we're actually going to show up like someone we love, right? If we think of a coworker that we hate or we just don't really like that much, you're not going to go out of your way to buy them a beautiful birthday present. You're going to forget about them. And that's what we do for ourselves is when we don't treat ourselves well or talk to ourselves nicely, we don't go out of the way to do nice things for ourselves versus when we really love and admire and respect someone like our best friend, we want them to have the world. We want them to have the most biggest, best birthday present ever. And so we spend lots of time and energy making sure that they have a really joyous birthday. And same thing with us, when we treat ourselves well and we have that self-respect for ourselves, we're going to go out of the way to make sure that we have a good life.
Of course, the challenging part is if we're in a really bad stage of our life. I mean, one of those down periods, the crash and burn moments where there's a whole bunch of stuff perhaps going on, or maybe there's one thing going on that we're trying to mask in some way through, I think you listed some before, gambling or drinking or drugging or whatever it is that you're doing. When you're in that kind of a state, I mean, the food intake at that point is merely another mask. It's and you can get into a positive mindset as much as you want to. You can try to do that. Chances are you're going to bring yourself right back down 3 minutes later, just because you have a lot going on. That's just part of that crash and burn moment. I mean, if somebody had said to you when you were lying on the floor in your bulimia moments, you would have said, yeah, go away, get out of here. Yeah. You're just not on point right now. That's the challenging part. That's the really tough time.
I think that comes down to removing the shame around it of when we're at rock bottom, we usually feel so much shame, like that there's something wrong with us, that we're broken, that, we're just these terrible humans who don't have our life together. But that's not true. And especially around food, what I like to remind people is that all you're doing at the end of the day is you're eating food. Like no one here is kicking puppies, taking candy from a kid. You're just eating food. And yes, it might be more food than your body needs, but you're not doing anything morally wrong here. And just taking that shame out of it. And so many men and women struggle with food nowadays. Like it really is much more common than it is uncommon, unfortunately. So knowing that you're not alone in it, that other people struggle with this. And ultimately, in our modern world, everyone has like their kind of like bad vice, their bad habit, something that they've gone to, something that they've had to overcome. So just reminding yourself too, that no one in this human journey has had a perfect life. You see all the time, unfortunately, celebrities who, are committing suicide or overdosing on drugs. And it's because, the things that make us happy don't always make us happy. And everyone is still going through the human experience. And so just taking the shame out of it that, yeah, maybe I am using food in a way that I don't really love, but I'm just eating food. And there's a lot worse things I could be doing right now than that.
Okay, fair enough.
So Amber, can I ask you a question? Because this is something I've been thinking about recently, is the injection. So the injection is now hit the UK. So there's a lot of people, and there's people I know that are using it. What are your thoughts on that? Mine are like, it's a great tool if you're really struggling to lose weight, and it, could potentially make you healthier, but actually it's not hitting the real problem. So I'm a bit in two minds about it. I just wonder what your thoughts would be.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's definitely a hot topic right now. I fall under both categories as well. I do think, when someone is morbidly obese and is, gonna die essentially if they do not get this solved in the next few years, it is a really valuable tool that can be life-saving for people. Now, on the flip side, I think it has become overpopularized and overused in a lot of cases where it shouldn't necessarily, and it doesn't need to be used. And what we're finding is that for, it's so new, but for the studies that are coming out, the statistics are ending up very similar to what diets would be. So diets, the research around that has shown that 95% of the people who lose weight on a diet will gain it all back or even more. So not a very effective tool. If someone told you you're going to do this thing and it's going to fail 95% of the time, you probably wouldn't do it. So we know that diets are not effective, but what's happening is they're showing that when people go off of GLP-1s, Ozempic, Mounjaro, all of these things, a very similar percentage happens where 95% of the people are either gaining all the weight back or even more and ending up at their starting point. And it's really unfortunate, but it makes a lot of sense because we're essentially changing our biology when we're using the weight loss injections, which can help us for the time being. But then the second we go off of them, we haven't learned any actionable tools. We haven't learned any skills. We have not changed anything actually in our brain of the way we are thinking about food differently. We just are like artificially creating this experience for ourselves. And so unless you're planning on being on it for the rest of your life and you are okay with that, I don't really think it's a good idea because a lot of times too, I actually had one of my clients who was on Wegovy and, we kind of did the program in conjunction. It was her choice and I supported her in her choice and what she thought was best for her. But, a lot of, she was doing it a very slow, mindful, methodical way with my help. But she had another friend who was on it, who was losing massive amounts of weight really quickly. And that metabolically for our body is very stressful and very unsustainable because we tend to lose a lot of muscle mass, which is why people get like Ozempic face is they're losing a lot of weight really quickly. Your body cannot keep up with that. And then when you go off of it, you have a lot less more muscle mass. Your bones are less dense. And so your body had a much lower metabolism than it would be at for example, if you ended up as 120 pounds versus someone who's just naturally 120 pounds, you're going to be able to eat so much less than that person who's naturally there because of how quickly your body lost weight and the processes that happen with that. So, if someone absolutely needs to do it, again, I think it can be a tool and tools can be used for their uses. But I really recommend someone at least trying a different approach where we address your mindset and psychology first, because at the very least, that is going to give you tools that last you forever, where when you go on a shot or something, it might help temporarily, but you want to make sure you also address your psychology.
Yeah, as you were describing that, one of the things that came to my mind, you mentioned the 5% rate with diets. One of my friends, co-host Joel Elston, is a life coach. And one of the things he talks about is how dissatisfied he is with 12-step programs, because when they do just 12-step and nothing else, the recovery rate is about 6%, which is pretty poor. Now, when they combine it with other things, like if they do 12-step and therapy, now their success rate shoots up. And the more things that they tie in, the greater their success rate is going to be. So it's not about finding necessarily one particular approach. It's about what's going to be your combination.
Right. Yeah. And that's what, with me, therapy didn't work for me, but that's not to say therapy doesn't work for people with their eating issues. It does for so many people as well. But I just think it's important to remember that there isn't one approach out there that's one size fits all. And so if you feel like you're doing something that isn't quite working for you, don't give up hope and say, well, I guess I'm just broken. It's like, let's find a different approach and see what might work for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, it sounds like you've been giving a lot of attention to this and working with a lot of clients to help them get past it. We should probably give listeners an idea of how to reach you, just in case there's somebody who says, yeah, that's somebody I want to reach out to and talk to. So I presume you like getting contacts. I mean, is that correct? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's a few places you can find me. As I mentioned, my website, theconfidenteater.org. You can find how to work with me there. I have my Confident Eater program, which is a full structured 6-month program that will help people go from secret binge eaters to confident normal eaters. I also have my guided audio there on my website to help you stop a binge and its tracks. You can find me on my podcast, Become a Confident Eater. And then I also have an Instagram called The Confident Eater and a free Facebook group called Become a Confident Eater.
How long have you been doing the podcast?
About a year and a half now.
Okay, very good. Yeah, so the podcaster is a fabulous thing. Yeah. So I'm going to go to Anne Marie now that we're beginning to wrap up here. And I always like to go to her because, first of all, not only is she a co-host, but she's a former listener. And so I kind of think of her as kind of representing the listening audience. So Anne-Marie, like you've been doing your usual mixture of listening and participating, but as the listener, what's your takeaway today?
The similarities between a lot of our calls, and I just find it so fascinating that whatever the issue, it usually comes down to understanding who we are, what our triggers are. And I loved some of the questions that Amber came out with, like, well, why do I want this? How's it going to make me feel? Really questioning and exploring. And I just think that's so important to increase our self-awareness in so many levels, but especially in eating. And it's fantastic. But I think I love the pillars. But the nugget that you gave me, Amber, was the shame isn't real. I loved that. So you're not doing anything wrong. Nothing. You've not killed anybody. Pick yourself back up. I just thought that was a really strong message.
Thank you.
Very good. Yes. One final thing I like to do as we wrap up these episodes. As you can tell, I've been around for a few years, and I can remember back before the internet came along and what it was like during that time, because I lived so much of my life during that time. But since the internet came along, lots of things have happened that are really fabulous. I mean, we can have conversations where you're in Denver, I'm in Connecticut, she's in the UK. I mean, that just wasn't possible 30 years ago. Now, all of a sudden, we can do that. Along with that has come the fact that we've changed the way we, not only how we communicate with each other, but how we get the word out about what we're doing. So I'm sure you have your podcast, you have your video thing that you create, and the other services you offer on your website. I'm sure you're doing all kinds of stuff on social media. There may even be a book deal. I don't know what's happening, but there's a lot of stuff that you're doing, like most people do when they're pursuing something like this. A lot of things that you're doing to reach out and communicate with people and help them, and people are helped, often people that you don't even know about. And that's where I noticed something that's different from 30 years ago. Because the thing that I noticed is there are a lot of people who are getting helped in ways that we don't even know about. They're picking stuff up. They heard something on a podcast, or they saw something on a post or whatever, and they put it to work in their own lives, and they got a benefit out of it. And then we never hear about it. And we never actually get any credit for it. And I said to myself, that's not right. So I started a new practice here on the podcast, and I'd like to carry it on with you. And that is to point out, Amber, on behalf of those people you've never met, never seen, never will meet, never will see, who've been helping in ways you didn't even know about. On their behalf, thank you for what you're doing, because you're making a difference in this world.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate you too. And thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.